Good afternoon, everyone. We're almost finished with the gospel. In fact, we have barely a page to do, a page and a half. The last letter in the appendix, in my copy, it's page 1025. And we're on this paragraph. The last time I visited him, the master, you have mentioned it in the third part of your book, under May 23rd, 1885. I had with me the headmaster of our school, who had just then graduated. You met him the other day. As soon as Sri Ramakrishna saw him, he asked me, "Where did you pick him up? He's a fine fellow." Then he continued, "You are a lawyer. You are very clever. Can you give me a little of your cleverness?" The other day your father came here and stayed 3 days. Myself, how did you find him? Master, a nice man, but now and then he talks nonsense. Myself, please help him get over it when you see him next. At this, Sri Ramakrishna smiled a little. Myself, please give us a few instructions. Master, do you know Hridoy? Myself, your nephew? I know him only by name. Master, Hridoy used to say to me, "Uncle, please don't give out your stock of instructions all at once. Why should you repeat the same things over and over again?" I would reply, "You fool, what's that to you? These are my words, and if I like, I shall repeat them 100,000 times. You keep quiet." Myself smiling, exactly so. A little later, he sat up on the bed. He repeated Om several times and began to sing a song whose first line is, "Dive deep, O mind, dive deep in the ocean of God's beauty." Hardly had he sung 1 or 2 lines when he himself dived deep and was lost in samadhi. When the samadhi was over, he began to pace the room, and with both hands pulled up the cloth he was wearing till it reached his waist. One end of it was trailing on the floor, and the other was hanging loose. Nudging my companion, I whispered, "See how nicely he wears his cloth?" A moment later, he threw away the cloth with the words, "Ugh, what a nuisance, off with it." He began to pace up and down the room naked. From the northern end of the room, he brought an umbrella and a stick and asked us, "Are these yours?" Scarcely had I replied no, when he said, "I knew it. I can judge a man by his stick and umbrella. They must belong to the man who was here some time ago, and swallowed a lot of my words without understanding them." A few minutes later, he sat down, still naked, on the northern end of his cot, facing the west, and asked me, "Well, do you consider me ungentlemanly?" Myself, "Of course not. You're a perfect gentleman. Why do you ask me that?" Master, you see, Shivanat and others don't think I am a gentleman. When they come, I have to wrap a cloth or something around me. Do you know Girish Ghosh? Myself, which Girish Ghosh? The one who is in the theater? Master, yes. Myself, I have never met him, but I know him by reputation. Master, a good man. Myself, they say he drinks. Master, let him. How long will he continue that? Do you know Narendra? Myself, no, sir. Master, I wish very much that you could meet him. He has passed the BA examination and is still unmarried. Myself, very well, sir, I shall meet him. Master, today there will be a kirtan at Ram Datta's house. You may meet him there. Please go there this evening. Myself, all right. Master, yes, do. Don't forget. Myself, it is your command. Shall I not obey it? Surely I will go. He showed us the pictures in his room and asked me whether a picture of Buddha could be had. Myself, very likely. Master, please get one for me. Myself, very well. I will bring one when I come again. But alas, I never returned to Dakshineshwar. That evening I went to Ram Babu's house and met Narendra. In one of the rooms, the master sat reclining against a pillow. Narendra sat at his right and I in front. He asked Narendra to talk with me, but Narendra said, I have a bad headache today. I don't feel like talking. I replied, then let us put it off until another day. And that came to pass in May or June in 1897 at Almora. The will of the master had to be fulfilled, and it was fulfilled after 12 years. Oh, how happily I spent those few days with Swami Vivekananda at Almora. Sometimes at his house, sometimes at mine, and one day on the top of a hill with nobody accompanying us. I never met him again after that. It was as if to fulfill the master's wish that we saw each other at Almora. I saw the master not more than 4 or 5 times, but in that short time, we became so intimate that I felt as if we had been classmates. How much liberty I took while speaking with him. But no sooner had I left his presence than it flashed on me, good gracious, think where I have been. What I saw and received in those few days has sweetened my whole life. That Elysian smile of his, laden with nectar, I have locked up in the secret closet of my memory. That is the unending treasure of a hapless person like myself. A thrill of joy passes through my heart when I think how a grain of this bliss shed from that laughter has been sweetening the lives of millions, even in distant America. If that be my case, you may very well understand how lucky you are. And that is the end of the Gospel of Ramakrishna. Now, it is our practice to start right over again. But I think I should probably read the introduction by Swami Nikhilananda, though which is M's first visit, but the introduction gives 7 in this gospel. March 1882. This section of the gospel has some of the major teachings of Ramakrishna in his whole impressions, which is repeated on and on in the rest of the gospel. It was on a Sunday in spring, a few days after Sri Ramakrishna's birthday, when M met him for the first time. Sri Ramakrishna lived at the Kalibari, the temple garden of Mother Kali on the bank of the Ganga at Dakshineshwar. M, being at leisure on Sundays, had gone with his friend Sidhu to visit several gardens in Baranagar. So I would assume that last letter that we just ended the gospel with was from Sidhu, who said that he brought this teacher to Ramakrishna, and M was the teacher at the school. As they were walking in Prasanna Banerjee's garden, Sidhu said, "There is a charming place on the bank of the Ganga where a Paramahamsa lives. Should you like to go there?" M assented, and they started immediately for the Dakshineshwar temple garden. They arrived at the main gate at dusk and went straight to Sri Ramakrishna's room. And there they found him seated on a wooden couch, facing the east, with a smile on his face. He was talking of God. The room was full of people, all seated on the floor, drinking in his words in deep silence. M stood there speechless and looked on. It was as if he were standing where all the holy places met, and as if Shukadev himself was speaking the word of God, or as if Sri Chaitanya were singing the name and glories of the Lord in Puri, with Ramananda, Swarup, and the other devotees. Sri Ramakrishna said, "When hearing the name of Hari or Rama once, you shed tears and your hair stands on end, then you may know for certain that you do not have to perform such devotions as the Sandhya anymore. Then only will you have a right to renounce rituals, or rather rituals will drop away of themselves. Then it will be enough if you repeat only the name of Rama or Hari, or even simply Om. Gayatri merges in Om." M looked around him with wonder and said to himself, "What a beautiful place. What a charming view from this spot." After a few moments, he thought, "Let me see the place first. Then I'll come back here and sit down." As he left the room with Sidhu, he heard the sweet music of the evening service arising in the temple from gong, bell, drum, and cymbal. He could hear music from the Nahabat, too, at the south end of the garden. The sounds traveled over the Ganga, floating away and losing themselves in the distance. A soft spring wind was blowing, laden with the fragrance of flowers. The moon had just appeared. It was as if nature and man together were preparing for the evening worship. M and Sidhu visited the 12 Shiva temples, the Radhakanta temple, and the temple of Bhavatarani. And as M watched the services before the images, his heart was filled with joy. On the way back to Sri Ramakrishna's room, the two friends talked. Sidhu told M that the temple garden had been founded by Rani Rasmani. He said that God was worshipped there daily as Kali, Krishna, and Shiva, and that within the gates many sadhus and beggars were fed. When they reached Sri Ramakrishna's door again, they found it shut, and Brinde, the maid, standing outside. M, who had been trained in the English manners and would not enter a room without permission, asked her, "Is the holy man in?" Brinde replied, "Yes, he's in the room." M, "How long has he lived here?" Brinde, "Oh, he has been here a long time." M, "Does he read many books?" Brinde, "Books? Oh dear, no. They're all on his tongue." M had just finished his studies in college. It amazed him to hear that Sri Ramakrishna read no books. M, "Perhaps it is time for his evening worship. May we go into the room? Will you tell him we are anxious to see him?" Brinde, "Go right in, children. Go in and sit down." Entering the room, they found Sri Ramakrishna alone, seated on the wooden couch. Incense had been burnt and all the doors were shut. As he entered, M with folded hands saluted the master. Then at the master's bidding, he and Sidhu sat on the floor. Sri Ramakrishna asked him, "Where do you live? What is your occupation? Why have you come to Bharanagar?" M answered all the questions, but he noticed that now and then the master seemed to become absent-minded. Later he learnt that this mood is called bhava, ecstasy. It is like the state of the angler who has been sitting with his rod. The fish comes and swallows the bait, and the float begins to tremble. The angler is on the alert. He grips the rod and watches the float steadily and eagerly. He will not speak to anyone. Such was the state of Sri Ramakrishna's mind. Later, M heard and himself noticed that Sri Ramakrishna would often go into this mood after dusk, sometimes becoming totally unconscious of the outer world. M. Perhaps you want to perform your evening worship. In that case, may we take our leave? Sri Ramakrishna is still in ecstasy. No, evening worship? No, it is not exactly that. After a little conversation, M saluted the master and took his leave. Come again, Sri Ramakrishna said. On his way home, M began to wonder, who was this serene-looking man who was drawing me back to him? Is it possible for a man to be great without being a scholar? How wonderful it is. I should like to see him again. He himself said, come again. I shall go tomorrow or the day after. M's second visit to Sri Ramakrishna took place on the southeast veranda at 8 o'clock in the morning. The master was about to be shaved. The barber had just arrived. As the cold season still lingered, he had put on a moleskin shawl bordered with red. Seeing M, the master said, so you have come. That's good. Sit down. He was smiling. He stammered a little when he spoke. Sri Ramakrishna to M, where do you live? M, in Calcutta, sir. Sri Ramakrishna, where are you staying here? M, I am at Puranagore at my older sister's, Ishan Kaviraj's house. Sri Ramakrishna, oh, at Ishan's. Well, how is Keshab now? He was very ill. M, indeed, I have heard so too, but I believe he is well now. Sri Ramakrishna, I made a vow to worship the mother with green coconut and sugar on Keshab's recovery. Sometimes in the early hours of the morning, I would wake up and cry before her, Mother, please make Keshab well again. If Keshab doesn't live, whom shall I talk with when I go to Calcutta? And so it was that I resolved to offer her the green coconut and sugar. Tell me, do you know for certain of a certain Mr. Cook who has come to Calcutta? Is it true he is giving lectures? Once Keshab took me on a steamer, and this Mr. Cook, too, was in the party. M. Yes, sir, I have heard something like that, but I have never been to his lecture. I don't know much about him. Sri Ramakrishna, Pratap's brother came here. He stayed a few days. He had nothing to do and said he wanted to live here. I came to know that he had left his wife and children with his father-in-law. He has a whole brood of them. So I took him to task. Just fancy, he is the father of so many children. Will people from the neighborhood feed them and bring them up? He isn't even ashamed that someone else is feeding his wife and children, and that they have been left at his father-in-law's house. I scolded him very hard and asked him to look for a job. Then he was willing to leave here. Are you married? M. Yes, sir. Sri Ramakrishna with a shudder. Oh, Ram Lala, alas, he is married. Like one guilty of a terrible offense, M sat motionless, his eyes fixed on the ground. He thought, is it such a wicked thing to get married? The master continued, have you any children? This time M could hear the beating of his own heart. He whispered in a trembling voice, yes, sir, I have children. Very sadly, Sri Ramakrishna said, ah me, he even has children. Thus rebuked, M sat speechless. His pride had been given a blow. After a few minutes, Sri Ramakrishna looked at him kindly and said affectionately, you see, you have certain good signs. I know them by looking at a person's forehead, his eyes, and so on. Tell me, now, what kind of person is your wife? Has she the spiritual attributes, or is she under the power of avidya? M. She is all right, but I'm afraid she is ignorant. Master with evident displeasure. and you are a man of knowledge? M had yet to learn the distinction between knowledge and ignorance. Up to this time, his conception had been that one got knowledge from books and schools. Later on, he gave up this false conception. He was taught that to know God is knowledge, and not to know him, ignorance. When Sri Ramakrishna exclaimed, "And you are a man of knowledge," M's ego was again badly shocked. M, Master, well, do you believe in God with form or without form? M, rather surprised, said to himself, how can one believe in God without form when one believes in God with form? And if one believes in God without form, how can one believe that God has a form? Can these two contradictory ideas be true at the same time? Can a white liquid like milk be black? M, Sir, I like to think of God as formless. Master, very good. It is enough to have faith in every aspect. You believe in God without form. That is quite all right. But never for a moment think that this alone is true and all else false. Remember that God with form is just as true as God without form, but hold fast to your own conviction. The assertion that both were equally true amazed him. He had never learnt this from his books. Thus, his ego received a third blow. But since it was not completely crushed, he came forward to argue with the master a little more. M, Sir, suppose one believes in God with form. Certainly he is not the clay image. Master interrupting, but why clay? It is an image of spirit. M could not quite understand the significance of this image of spirit. But sir, he said to the master, one should explain to those who worship the clay image that it is not God, and that while worshiping it, they should have God in view and not the clay image. One should not worship clay. Master sharply. That's the one hobby of you Calcutta people, giving lectures and bringing others to the light. Nobody ever stops to consider how to get the light himself. Who are you to teach others? He who is the Lord of the universe will teach everyone. He alone teaches us, who has created this universe, who has made the sun and moon, men and beasts and all other beings, who has provided means for their sustenance, who has given children parents and endowed them with love to bring them up. The Lord has done so many things. Will he not show people the way to worship him? If they need teaching, then he will be the teacher. He is our inner guide. Suppose there is an error in worshiping the clay image. Doesn't God know that through it he alone is being invoked? He will be pleased with that very worship. Why should you get a headache over it? You had better try for the knowledge and devotion yourself. This time, M felt that his ego was completely crushed. He said to himself, yes, he has spoken the truth. What need is there for me to teach others? Have I known God? Do I really love him? I haven't room enough for myself in my bed, and I'm inviting my friend to share it with me? I know nothing about God, yet I'm trying to teach others. What a shame. How foolish I am. This is not mathematics or history or literature that one can teach it to others. No, this is the deep mystery of God. What he says appeals to me. This was M's first argument with the master, and happily his last. Now, in this very brief second meeting, Ramakrishna has basically told you the whole way to what the goal of life is, to realize God and see him. Any questions about it? Any discussion? I find it very helpful to reread this every once in a while, especially this part. Okay, so this Sunday, Swami Vedarupananda will be giving a lecture, and it's the story of creation. So, as Swami Brahmananda said, are they competing? Is it the same in the beginning and the story of creation? We'll see. Wednesday we will have for Seekers of God at 4 o'clock. And next Saturday we will have the Gospel of Ramakrishna at 5 o'clock. And that's, as long as there's no questions or discussion, we'll end with a chant. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.